The courtroom was tense from the moment Pam Bondi stepped through the doors. Reporters whispered, spectators craned their necks, and the gallery was packed with people sensing something big was about to unfold. At the front, Judge Edward Chen adjusted his robe and leaned back with a look of calm superiority. From his high seat on the bench, he scanned the room and locked eyes with Bondi. "So, the famous Pam Bondi," he said, voice laced with condescension. "Here to grandstand again, I presume?" The courtroom murmured. Pam didn't flinch. She opened her briefcase, calmly retrieving her binder of documents. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she replied, "I'm here to expose a series of judicial decisions that should concern every American." Chen scoffed loudly. "Spare me the theatrics. If this is another one of your media stunts, I suggest you keep it brief." Bondi raised an eyebrow, but stayed composed. She clicked on a small projector remote. Behind her, a screen lit up with a timeline, names, dates, and judicial signatures. One stood out. Chen's. The screen displayed a sealed court record with Judge Edward Chen's electronic signature at the bottom, one that wasn't supposed to exist. Pam Bondi turned to the room. "This document," she said clearly, "was entered into the record in a sealed case involving corporate immunity protections. But it wasn't just sealed from the public, it was sealed from Congress." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Judge Chen's face shifted. The smirk was gone. "Ms. Bondi, this is outrageous. You're treading dangerously close to contempt." Pam stepped forward. "And you're treading dangerously close to criminal obstruction." She pointed to the screen. "You signed off on a legal shield that allowed a foreign-linked contractor to bypass U.S. safety inspections, after receiving a personal investment return through a proxy fund in San Francisco." Now the courtroom was no longer just murmuring, it was buzzing. The clerk stopped typing. The bailiffs exchanged glances. Chen stood abruptly. "This is inadmissible. That file was never meant to be found." Pam interrupted. "Unfortunately for you, Judge, a federal whistleblower sent it to the Oversight Committee. You're not the only one with access to the archives anymore." A U.S. Marshal near the back slowly moved toward the front. Judge Chen gripped the edge of the bench, trying to maintain his composure. "This is a blatant ambush," he barked. "You don't have jurisdiction to question a sitting federal judge." "You're right," Bondi said. "That's why I'm not the one filing charges." She held up a second file. "This is from the Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General. They've been investigating sealed rulings tied to private equity firms with foreign interests." "Your name came up repeatedly, Judge Chen." From the gallery, cameras clicked. One reporter stood up mid-note taking. Even the stenographer paused, uncertain whether to keep typing. Chen's voice faltered. "You're grandstanding. This is political." Pam held firm. "What this is accountability." Just then, a side door opened, and two senior federal marshals entered, not local bailiffs, not courthouse security. One of them addressed the court without hesitation. "Judge Edward Chen, you are being taken into federal custody on suspicion of judicial misconduct, concealment of financial interests, and obstruction of oversight investigations." The silence that followed was deafening. Chen blinked in disbelief. You can't be serious." The marshals stepped forward. "Please step down from the bench." The room didn't erupt. It froze. Judge Chen's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the bench, as if steadying himself. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then one marshal took a step closer. "Your Honor." "Now." Slowly, Chen descended the steps from the bench, the same steps so many had climbed under his judgment. Now, every eye in the room was fixed on him. The marshals didn't shove him. They didn't shout. They simply took his wrists, turned him around, and fastened the cuffs with a cold finality that echoed louder than any gavel. The sound of the metal clicking shut was the only thing anyone could hear. From the gallery, a woman whispered, "Is this really happening?" Pam Bondi stepped aside to let the marshals pass. As Judge Chen was led by her, their eyes met, his, desperate and stunned. Hers, steady. She didn't say a word. But the message was clear. A reckoning had come to the bench. As the heavy courtroom doors closed behind the marshals and Judge Chen, the stunned silence slowly gave way to murmurs, then voices, and finally an eruption of disbelief. Pam Bondi remained where she was, unfazed by the chaos swirling around her. She turned back to the projector and clicked to the next slide. "This," she said, pointing to a long list of case numbers, "is only the beginning. These are the rulings Judge Chen quietly sealed, rerouted, or manipulated. We believe at least 9 of them directly benefited entities with undisclosed financial ties to him." One of the attorneys seated at the government's table stood up. "Ms. Bondi," he said, voice tight, "are you suggesting more judges might be involved?" "I'm not suggesting," she replied, flipping another page. "I'm stating." Another slide came up, a network map of judicial decisions, lobbyist firms, and financial transactions. At the center, Chen. But branching out were other names. Recognizable ones. One spectator muttered, "This is going to blow the roof off the whole circuit." A court clerk quietly stepped out, phone pressed to his ear. Reporters bolted from the gallery to get the story out before the hour was up. And still, Pam Bondi stood firm, hands folded in front of her, as if she knew this was only the first domino. While the courtroom buzzed, panic ignited behind the scenes. In the federal courthouse's private corridors, phones rang off the hook. Judicial aides scrambled to contact chambers. Security teams reviewed surveillance footage. In the judge's quarters, 2 clerks were already boxing up files. The chief judge had issued an immediate administrative suspension of Edward Chen's duties, pending federal review. Back in the courtroom, Bondi continued her presentation with quiet precision. For over 3 years, rulings in key regulatory and financial cases were systematically hidden from public record. Chen wasn't working alone. The patterns matched data collected by independent auditors and whistleblowers, one of whom is in this building right now. From the far side of the room, a woman in a navy blue suit stood up. A badge glinted at her hip. "Special Agent Dana Kessler," she said. "Department of Justice, Oversight Division." The room quieted again. She approached Bondi, handed over a sealed envelope, and addressed the court. "Ms. Bondi's findings align with what we've uncovered during a covert 18-month investigation. I'm here to formally request this court move into an emergency closed session to protect additional evidence and witnesses." The presiding temporary judge, who had taken the bench after Chen was removed, looked pale but nodded. "Request granted." Pam glanced at the gallery, then slowly closed her binder. This wasn't just a courtroom moment anymore. This was the beginning of a full-scale exposure. Meanwhile, deep inside the courthouse's secure holding area, Judge Edward Chen sat behind reinforced glass, still wearing his black robe, now wrinkled and out of place. His hands rested on a steel table, uncuffed but shaking. Across from him sat 2 federal agents. No small talk. No courtesy. Just questions. "Judge Chen," one agent said flatly, "were you aware that the financial trust you moved assets into last year was registered to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, under your brother-in-law's name?" Chen didn't answer. His jaw clenched. "We've tracked money flowing from that trust into multiple PACs, law foundations, and judicial campaigns, many of which ruled on overlapping cases you presided over." Still no response. But a drop of sweat rolled down Chen's temple. The second agent dropped a printed email on the table. And then there's this message to a lobbyist at Harman Strategy Group, time-stamped a week before you sealed the Bainbridge ruling. Care to explain why you were discussing mutual assurances and quiet signatures? Outside the holding room, a DOJ official stood watching through the two-way glass. Behind her, another agent whispered, "Pam Bondi really blew this wide open." The official nodded slowly. She didn't just bring receipts. She brought the match to light the whole thing up. As the interrogation continued downstairs, the upper floors of the courthouse were in turmoil. Judicial staffers were quietly pulling hard drives, deleting message threads, and calling personal attorneys. Everyone who had even brushed against Judge Chen's sealed rulings felt the heat. In Conference Room 4B, Pam Bondi sat with Special Agent Kessler and a small federal task force. The door was guarded. Inside, they reviewed documents that had been previously marked confidential, chambers only. These memos, Bondi said, tapping the stack, were written by internal clerks who raised concerns about ethical conflicts. Most were ignored. A few were reassigned. 2 even resigned under pressure. One agent flipped through a resignation letter. "It's all here. Patterns of intimidation, financial coercion, even rerouting of appellate notices." Kessler leaned back. "This is going higher than Chen. Some of these signatures belong to names we never thought we'd see in an internal audit." Pam nodded grimly. "That's why this can't be buried in bureaucracy. If it gets kicked upstairs without exposure, it dies quietly." She paused, looked around the table. "We need a public inquiry. Full transparency. No closed-door whitewashing." Kessler nodded. "We're preparing a joint task force briefing for the Attorney General. You'll be there when it breaks." Outside the conference room, word was spreading. Edward Chen wasn't just one bad judge. He was the first domino. By nightfall, the story had broken nationwide. News tickers flashed, federal judge taken into custody, allegations of corruption and concealed foreign ties. In Washington, D.C., the Department of Justice scrambled to contain the fallout. Calls flooded into the White House counsel's office. Senate Judiciary Committee members demanded immediate briefings. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi stood at a press podium just outside the courthouse, flanked by Special Agent Kessler and members of the DOJ task force. Reporters jostled for space as flashbulbs lit up her face. "This is not about politics," Bondi said into the microphones. "This is about integrity. The American public deserves a judiciary free from financial compromise. And what we uncovered today is only the surface." A journalist called out, "Are more judges under investigation?" Pam didn't blink. "Yes." Another shouted, "Are you saying courtrooms across the country might be compromised?" Bondi looked straight into the camera. "I'm saying we're going to find out. And we're not stopping here." Back in the courthouse, Judge Edward Chen was being transferred to a secure federal detention facility. His robe had been taken. His phone, confiscated. He walked in silence, flanked by Marshals, a man who once decided the fate of others, now utterly at their mercy. And above all of it, a simple truth had taken root: no robe makes you untouchable. Within 48 hours, a special judicial commission was formed. Emergency subpoenas were issued. Judges, clerks, and legal consultants across multiple states were placed under review. And Pam Bondi? She was already 2 steps ahead. Inside a secure federal facility in D.C., she met privately with the Deputy Attorney General and the head of the Office of Legal Policy. On the table before them was a list of 17 judges who had signed rulings in cases flagged for financial conflict, secrecy, or offshore influence. "This wasn't a Chen problem," Bondi said, her voice low and focused. "It was a network. And it operated because no one thought we'd ever trace the paper trail this far." The deputy AG nodded grimly. We've already begun background checks on every name on this list. Your documentation, every memo, timestamp, and asset disclosure, is holding up. Back at the courthouse, courtrooms once viewed as untouchable now felt fragile. Staff whispered. Some judges called in sick. One announced early retirement. And in a conference room lined with file boxes and red evidence seals, Bondi looked through one final report. It was from a junior clerk who had worked under Chen briefly and flagged an irregular ruling, only to be terminated within a week. She turned the page and whispered, "Not anymore." Justice hadn't just knocked. It had kicked the door in. 3 weeks later, Judge Edward Chen stood in a different kind of courtroom, not on the bench, but before it. In a plain suit with no robe, no gavel, and no illusion of power, he faced federal charges including obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal financial interests, and abuse of judicial authority. The evidence, laid out in meticulous detail by the task force Pam Bondi helped coordinate, was overwhelming. Transaction records. Private emails. Internal memos. And testimonies, from former clerks, whistleblowers, and even 2 retired judges who quietly corroborated parts of the network. The trial would take months. But the message had already landed. Across the country, sealed rulings were being reviewed. New oversight protocols were proposed in Congress. And the American public, long skeptical of institutional integrity, was finally seeing accountability in motion. Pam Bondi stood again on courthouse steps, reporters gathered around her like before. But this time, she didn't need a dramatic line or closing argument. She simply said, "Let this be a signal to every courtroom in America, no one is above the law, not even those who wear the robe." As the cameras flashed and headlines rolled out, Judge Edward Chen was escorted into a transport vehicle, his eyes hollow, the weight of justice finally settled on his shoulders. And Bondi? She turned away from the cameras and back toward the work. Because for her, this wasn't about winning a moment. It was about cleaning up the system, one bench at a time.